Pop quiz. How did John Hughes get into teen films? Answer. Well, let's have John explain it to you.
Stumbled into it. Like I stumbled into teen films. I started making teen films because if I was going to direct, I wanted to make sure that I didn't have an actor say to me, you have no idea what you're doing, because I didn't. And I figured, well, maybe if they're like 15, they won't ask that question. Or at least I can say to them, do you know what you're doing? And they wouldn't know either. So, it's all accidental. This is not, my career was not planned in any way.
Coming to you from a basement studio somewhere down under, it's the 80s Show with Australia's Retro Man. On tonight's show, Retro Man brings you Backstage Pass and the story of John Hughes' unrealized project, Oil and Vinegar. Well, what are we waiting for? Lights, camera, Retro Man.
G'day viewers, Retro Man here, and welcome to the 80s Show. Now today we have another episode of Backstage Pass. That's where I throw up some interesting anecdotes about the movie and music industry in the 80s. Today it's all about John Hughes. I'm sure you've heard the name. He was a prolific writer-director in the 1980s. He made such films as 16 Candles with Molly Ringwald and the seminal detention film, the classic, you know the one, The Breakfast Club, with that ensemble cast of teenagers. It was spectacular and a much-loved film. Now, John Hughes was a prolific writer, and he didn't stop writing in the 80s. In fact, just before his breakthrough with 16 Candles, he wrote a couple of interesting little films like Mr. Mom, which was a vehicle for Michael Keaton, and also he penned the original National Lampoon's Vacation, which was a blockbuster for Chevy Chase. Now, what I'll be talking about today is an unrealized John Hughes project. The name of it was Oil and Vinegar. It never came to be. It was a script that he penned, I think around 84, 85-ish as I understand it. And it involved a travelling salesman picking up a hitchhiker at the side of the road, which she was a rock chick. So you've got a travelling salesman and a rock chick travelling in a car together. They don't know each other. And over the course of the vehicular drive, they sort of bond and get to know each other and, I suppose, become friends. Now, it's a bit of a dramedy, let's say, in a similar vein as The Breakfast Club. A very talky film it was perceived to be, with the two of them having a lot of banter to and fro, getting to know each other. And as I understand it, the plan was that they would spend a night together in a motel to sort of break up the trip. And that's when other things happen. And as I've heard over the years, there was a bit of a realisation there that this travelling salesman was actually going to his own wedding. He was en route to his own wedding when he picked up this hitchhiker. Now, the two roles John Hughes had in his head were to be played by Matthew Broderick and Molly Ringwald. As you know, Matthew Broderick was a favourite of John Hughes. He worked with John on Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and Molly was kind of Hughes' muse, if you will. And it was going to be a vehicle for Matthew Broderick, Molly Ringwald, directed by John Hughes. Of course, it was written by him. But what happened with this project is that Hughes was so high in demand, and he was working on things like Weird Science and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He sort of kicked this one aside, and it was around the time that he had a guy called Howard Deutsch, a director who stepped up and made Pretty in Pink for Hughes, and he also directed Some Kind of Wonderful. So Hughes, for a little while there, was in cahoots with director Howard Deutsch, who made those two films for Hughes. And Hughes sort of passed this one off to Deutsch and said, hey, why don't you have a stab at directing this other one? But at that point, Deutsch was almost a little burnt out. He'd just done 2 consecutive films for Hughes and needed a little break. And apparently at the end of Some Kind of Wonderful, he developed a little bit of a romance with Leah Thompson, the actress in that film. And Thompson kind of said to Deutsch, well, maybe you need to step back from directing for a little while, take a break, so to speak. And Deutsch stepped away from that John Hughes project. Hughes got involved, of course, in that classic road flick with John Candy and Steve Martin called Planes, Trains and Automobiles. And Oil and Vinegar, the road trip film with Matthew Broderick and Molly Ringwald, was put on the back burner, never to be really spoken about again. It just sort of hangs around, it's in the ether. This project, it could have been, should have been. It's a bit of a shame it wasn't. So yeah, there was definitely some unrealised John Hughes projects floating around. Let's hope that one day they dig up some of those scripts again and get a director on board and turn these into something. One thing I do know about Oil and Vinegar, if it does come together one day and become a reality, of course we will never see the film that we had hoped for with Matthew Broderick and Molly Ringwald, but I'm sure we'll get some other interesting actors coming into the fray, and I'll be watching to see how that turns out, if it ever does. Actually, Howard Deutsch in recent years has said, well, we still have the script and I'm still directing, so who knows? Maybe Deutsch might one day step up to the plate and decide to direct this little John Hughes dramedy. So we'll see how that transpires. It's never too late sometimes. So that was the history behind Oil and Vinegar for this special John Hughes edition of Backstage Pass. I hope you've enjoyed watching the show, guys. If you're a John Hughes fan, tell us what your favourite John Hughes film is from the 80s. I know I have plenty of those. There's 3 of them sitting right there. So pop your comments in the box below. And that's it. That's today's episode of Backstage Pass. You're watching the 80s show. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. It'd be nice for you to join me. So thanks for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure. This is Retro Man, living the dream, 80s style. Stay gold.
Thanks for watching. Retro Man will return faster than a boomerang and just as entertaining as a John Hughes movie. Please subscribe and good night, viewers.